I wonder if you've noticed, at least the way I see things, the last few years, it seems like the world's gone crazy. Maybe you haven't noticed, but every time I turn the TV on, all I hear is bad news. I see how divided people are in the community, in families. You don't believe me? Just mention vaccines. Mention Donald Trump. Mention climate change. And here's another thing I've really noticed. It's really hard to find out what the truth is about anything anymore. Oh, I know the truth. No, hang on a minute. No, I know the truth. No. I know the truth. Like, what's true? How do you know whether you're healthy or not? Well, if you're really sick, you know that. But should I eat this or should I not eat that? Or what diet should I be? What food? Have you noticed how confused the world is? Like, just name a subject. We're confused. Here's the thing I'll tell you that I notice as a pastor, how many people are depressed. Like, I go visit people. I mean, you come to church and you've got your tie on or your nice dress or whatever, and you scrub up really well. You're in the parking lot and you're just about ready to kill yourself, but by the time it's the sanctified parking lot, by the time you get out of the car into the church, you present really well. But there's a lot of people really struggling with stuff. Another thing I've noticed with people when I have conversations is, on the outside, everybody looks pretty confident, but when you look in their eyes, you can see fear. People are really scared. I mean, nuclear war. You get it. It seems to me that the world is a very, very different place than when I grew up as a kid in Australia. And even when I first came to Canada 30 years ago, it seems like things are really changed. I don't know. What do you think? Would you say? Yeah. Right? It's like, the world's pretty screwy. There's very few people I meet that think, yep, everything's going really fine, the world's a great place. Now, I'd like to share with you just one simple spiritual truth that could change your whole life and your whole outlook forever. Now, many people in Canada, this really shocks me, many people in Canada are not really interested in spiritual things. I mean, they say they're spiritual, but that's about it. But once you start going through really hard times and you're suffering, you've got cancer, you lost a loved one, first Christmas without a loved one, that's pretty tough, right? You lost a baby. When you start going through real suffering, that's when people's priorities change and they start thinking about spiritual things. But most Canadians, we're good. We have a saying in Australia which is just a blight on our spirituality. How you going, mate? No worries, she'll be right. Like, life's a mess for you and she'll be right. So if you're interested in spiritual awareness, this may actually have some impact on your life. Now, I've got a hunch you have got an interest in spiritual awareness, otherwise you wouldn't be at church on Christmas Eve. It's either that or your mum said no turkey dinner unless you go with her to church. That also happens, right? I get that. But at some point, there are people who are actually interested in this whole spirituality of what's going on in the world around us, but maybe have never really found a good way of explaining it. It's sort of like you're entering the twilight zone. You are travelling through another dimension, a dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind, and I'm going to add, of the spirit. So here's the first thing I want to suggest to you tonight, just really quickly, that helps me make sense of the ills that are in the world, why the world doesn't make sense anymore. If you have a look of the great distress and the great suffering of many people, whether it's in the world of politics, the digital world, Do you know how many people are addicted to their phones? Ooh, that's a sore spot. Do you know how many people are addicted to their computers, to gaming, to whatever addictions? And okay, so we're not doing socially unacceptable addictions, you know, drugs and booze and stuff. No, we're doing socially acceptable addictions. Why the world, why the news is the way it is, why there are so many messed up relationships. Can I suggest to you tonight that the real problem is not the physical, the mental, the social. I'm going to suggest to you that the world that we live in, say Canada, North America, has a spiritual deficiency. That I'm saying that as a pastor, but I'm also saying that as a person who spends a lot of time with lots of people in hospitals, in schools, all sorts of... I meet people, you know, you meet, as a pastor, you meet homeless people and you meet brain surgeons and everybody in between. I would suggest to you that there is a spiritual problem in our world. And if you want to understand what's going on and why things are just so crazy at the moment, I'm going to suggest you should explore the fact that the world around us is spiritually sick. Now, you can't get a stethoscope or a thermometer to work out if someone's spiritually sick or the world is spiritually sick. But let me put it to you this way, for you who are the medical people. If you don't have a good diagnosis of the problem, you'll never have a healthy prognosis. And so we've got all these ideas of how to fix the world. I'm going to suggest to you that the most important fact and spiritual truth that you probably hear in your whole life is that we can fix the world if we make a diagnosis that the world is spiritually unhealthy. And if we could find a prognosis to help the world how to be spiritually healthy, everything makes sense. Now, I come from the other side of the railway tracks. I never used to be a Christian. When I was 22, I was a very different lad in Australia. Drugs, sex and rock and roll, as we would say in North America, I was on the other side of the railway tracks. But I discovered a spiritual truth when I was a lot younger, but in my adult years, that I think might be something, at the very least, if you're not a follower of Jesus, you might at least consider this. So here we have the Christmas season, right? We're celebrating the birth of Jesus, the son of Joseph, a historic figure born in 3 B.C. probably, God in human form. He grew up about 30 years old, and we have the record of his conversation with his disciples, with his followers. Now, you may not realise this, but back then, in about 27, 28, 29 AD, Jerusalem, Israel, was under occupation by the Romans. And the Romans weren't exactly Sunday school teachers. They were brutal. The politics was brutal. There was disease, there was bribery and corruption. They were an occupying army. People were in slavery. It was way worse than even to today. And at one point, while Jesus was walking along the road with his disciples, this is sort of just the night before he was murdered, he said to them, and it sort of relates to you and me because we're in a place that was like Israel 2,000 years ago with occupying army and all that stuff. He said to them, don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, trust in me. Yeah, that's easy for you to say, Jesus. You don't have a disease. You didn't lose your loved one. You didn't go through all the suffering and struggles. Well, hang on a minute. Before you say that, Jesus knew some stuff about suffering too. But more importantly, he understood the world. actually it hasn't changed for 2,000 years. It's the same root cause. And then, and I'll sort of wrap this up with this, then Jesus said the most important spiritual truth that any human being could ever hear, if you're willing to consider this. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one will know God unless you understand who I am. That's a pretty exclusive statement. Nobody will know God unless you know me. Well, why is this really, really important? Because listen to what Jesus said. He said, this is really radical actually, he said that he's the way. That means he will show you what the purpose for life is. Most of us are running around trying to make money and think that happiness and wealth are the most important goals of life. You know, if you're in a hospice somewhere in a hospital, he said, I can show you what to do with your life. I can give you meaning to your life. That's pretty precious. He said that. That's a spiritual thing, because you have to ask Jesus, what does he want to do with your life and what does he want you to do? The second thing he said on the way, the second thing he said is, I am the truth. Whoa, hang on a minute. You've got your truth and I've got my truth. That's the world we live in now. Truth is relative. Jesus said he understands absolute truth. I'm pretty sure that if we keep working on it, we're going to be able to change the speed of light because you think it's going to be less than I think it is. And Jesus said, the word he uses is absolute truth. I know the truth of every situation and how to address every situation if you're willing to find out. You want to know what truth is? You should listen to him, his teachings, what he says. He makes sense of all. He explains everything that's going on in the world. He says he's the way, he's the truth, and thirdly, he's the life. He will show you how to live life. It's not just a survival kit. Many people are just hanging on, getting by. And he said he can show you have what he calls abundant life. Listen, wherever you are on your journey, if you want to make sense of the world in which you live, I'm going to suggest to you, you consider that. Imagine that, knowing how to live your life, what truth is, and what life is all about. He makes sense of all of that. He's God in human form, that's what we believe. And if you are willing to consider that, it might make a lot of sense for you in the world in which we live. Let me close with this. I've been a pastor now for 20 years. I've been a Christian for 45 years. As I said, you know, I didn't have a really easy upbringing. But I've never met, in 45 years, I've never met what in Australian language we would call a fair dinkum Christian, somebody who's really sincere, like an authentic Christian, not just a speak, you know, lots of people go to church, but I'm talking about a really authentic Christian. I've never met, in my whole life, I've never met an authentic Christian who said, look, I've sincerely tried to live my life according to what Jesus taught. I've dedicated my life to following Jesus, and I trust him as best as I can in every aspect of my life, and it didn't work. I never met a person who said that. So I want to suggest to you tonight the most important spiritual truth that you can hear in your whole life, especially if you're a person who's confused about the world in which you live and you can't make sense of it. And you may be being distracted by your attempt and your tries to find truth, and where truth seems to be so subjective. You throw your hands up, I give up, I don't know what the truth is. I want to suggest to you tonight that the most important spiritual truth is that Jesus can show you the way you should live your life, how you should live, and what truth is. Sure makes a lot of sense when you can find God. And he can introduce you to God in a personal way, not just in a religious way. So that, my friends, is the most important spiritual truth you'll ever hear. If you take these words to heart and you work out how to follow that, find out what Jesus said, learn to hear what he said and live his way, your life will never be the same again. And he'll set you free from bondage. He'll show you who God is. You'll get to know him personally. And you'll finally make sense of the world in which you live. You think about that. Now listen, the last 4 weeks in our church, we've been praying the Apostles' Creed, which is a summary of what Christians believe. And I thought it would be really great after a sermon like this or a talk like this that we could get to say the Apostles' Creed. Now, if you don't believe this, you don't have to say it. It's cool. I get that. But if you want to respond to what you heard with an open heart and say, yeah, I'm going to try this, I want to believe this, then you can say it. 2 things I want to just really, really quickly mention. At the second paragraph there, the second last line, he suffered under Pontius Pilate. I just want to remind you, for those of us who study theology, Jesus suffered not just under Pontius Pilate. He suffered in his life. It wasn't easy for him. The next paragraph, the third paragraph, says he descended to the dead. That means he literally died. And the last paragraph, the second line, I believe in the Holy Catholic Church. We're not talking about denominations, Roman Catholic, Baptist. Catholic is the word for universal. I believe in the church all over the world.